Hello and welcome to my podcast. Do me a favor, subscribe to the Keim Report wherever you get your podcasts. If you're watching on YouTube, like button, subscribe button. You can find us there as part of Empire Media. That's AMPIRE. As you can see, if you're watching now, I am joined by Sam Fortier from the Washington Post, who loves when I say, welcome to my podcast. I know he does. So he gets a big kick out of it. Anyway, Sam, we're here today to talk about another quarterback move. And just obviously, there's one game left. They're out of the playoffs. You know, what's left to play for. But I do think when you see Sam Howell out there, there's a little bit, at least some intrigue for Washington fans. First of all, were you surprised at the way this came about and how it and the decision?
First of all, I love when you say welcome to my podcast, because I know that has been a refined technique over the last 50 years. And so you've absolutely nailed it by now. But no,
that's all the time we have here, folks.
No, but seriously, I was not surprised. And Sam even said this during his news conference, and Sam is saying it right now, that when you're out of playoff contention, when you're playing for nothing but the future, the 5th round quarterback that you took, who is probably the only viable franchise quarterback on your roster, and I would even put an asterisk on that, you just want to see what he has, you know, especially because the last time you saw him was in the final preseason game at Baltimore. He did some things there that impressed you, but there was a lot to be desired. And I know the Howellians, as you've called them, which I really do enjoy, I know they're pretty fired up about this game, and they should be. I would have tempered expectations, but certainly, you know, when you're talking about what this game means, it's all about 2023. So do that.
It is. And I agree with you. I would have tempered expectations just because he hasn't played in the game before. This is not exactly the easiest defense for a rookie quarterback to play against. I mean, I think it's 10th in yards per passing yards per game, 3rd and 6th in interceptions, 3rd in sacks. I got it. That's true media. That's true media. Anyway, but it's a really difficult defense to play for. So what do you think we can judge from what I guess we have to wait and see, but what are you going to look for most when watching him play?
The other caveat I would put on here is we should expect to see a lot of younger guys around him as well. Chris Paul will probably at guard. We'll probably see a heavy dose of snaps for Cole Turner at tight end, maybe Armani Rogers or Curtis Hodges if those guys are healthy enough to play. So I would say that's another caveat. But the things that I'll be looking for to tell, like, hey, where has Sam Howell grown? What progress have we seen since the preseason? Will be in his timing. Because the thing that they talked about that was the biggest difference coming from North Carolina was, how does he sync his hitches, his drops to those routes? You know, some routes you drop back and you throw it off your first hitch. Some routes you drop back and you throw it off your second hitch. And that timing is really key. And I think Carson Wentz kind of illustrated the value in that by not doing it last week. And I think that you could argue, is that a Scott Turner thing, you know, because they maybe set him up in a more difficult position. But I think really that just underlined how critical those things are to this offense. And so for Sam Howell, can he do that consistently?
And I think to that point, and one of the things, and I did actually had an interview with Sam on the podcast last month, just to kind of on his progress. And he said, one of the things he didn't have, like at North Carolina, the footwork, it was pretty much the same for every route. So he didn't really have to vary it. And they've talked here where sometimes he'd get a little bit lazy with the footwork because it's so new. So I do think like that's a big thing. And to your point about all the young guys playing, going back to the decision, if I'm Taylor Heinicke, it's reason number one why I don't want to play. I think if I'm him, there's nothing to be gained. There's nothing of value to come from Heinicke himself playing. You can only get to free agency maybe in a negative situation. Whereas for Howell, there's a lot that can be learned, and just that he can build on this. Win or lose, whatever happens for him, there's stuff that he can build on, right?
Yeah, and I think for Taylor, if you're him and you say, okay, you thought this offense needed a spark and you went to Carson and now you want me to come in and clean up the mess. You know, I think that there's another element to that as well. And so, yeah, for me, when, you know, Taylor said that he wasn't mad that he's not going to be starting this game, that he had a conversation with Ron this morning. I know initially there was some, you know, there was an idea that maybe it would be Taylor and then go to Sam, but it sounds to me like Taylor was not upset at all about this decision, maybe even, you know, push for it. And so I think that everybody is probably excited to see Sam.
Right. And to be clear, they were going to go with the Heinicke-Howell split. And I think Rivera, you know, on Tuesday, it's what you heard they were leaning toward. In the morning, it's what you heard they were going to, that the expectation. I think the more Ron Rivera talked to people, including Heineke, Howell, and other team leaders, that the push was more for Sam Howell. What do you think that says, if anything?
I think it sort of goes back to respect for Taylor in one hand, and I think also everybody understands where they're at. No one is thinking that we can make the playoffs on Sunday, or that this game means anything to anyone of note other than maybe, you're picking up some bonuses in your contract, or you're developing for next season. So, and I think everyone understands this team does not view Taylor as a starter. It will almost certainly not bring back Carson Wentz. Like, everybody gets the deal. And so, hey, like, it's kind of like that thing, like, if you're going to do it, just lean in, just do it 100%.
And agreed, because I think there's some intrigue in what he can do. In what role? I think that's what they want to find out. And that's where, what do you remember about watching him this summer? When you look back on that, what were some of your takeaways that you recall?
The number one thing being, him adapting to the NFL, kind of going from that air raid offense that he had at North Carolina under Phil Longo. And I thought they did a lot of good things there. The thing really that stood out, there was, one of those 2-minute drills where I remember he really struggled to get them down the field. But other than like the hiccups and kind of the nitpicks that I have, I mean, he's a really exciting player. He's mobile. He has a really live arm. The connection even with De'Ami Brown. I thought those things were really fun. I think one of the big things, especially against this defensive line that Ron talked about today also, is can he get the ball out quickly? Because if he doesn't see his first read, sometimes he'll hang on it, and that will give defenses opportunities to beat him up. And as we've seen with Taylor, as we saw with Carson, as we've seen with, there were 2 running backs out at practice today, Jarrett Patterson and Jonathan Williams. A lot of these guys, when you play their physical style, when you gap scheme run like they do, it's a physical, brutal game. And so I think Sam Howell's going to do his best to avoid that.
And you have to avoid that with Micah Parsons coming at you and Dan Quinn, who does a great job of creative pressure up front. And that's where they're going to be. The challenge is going to be, but what I'm looking for too, is he does play, when you watch him in Carolina, he did play with some swag. And he did, he can create with his legs. So can he do that? And, he almost feels like, and I know it's kind of a cliche to say this now, but he's almost like a more athletic, stronger arm version of Taylor Heineke. The way he plays, and his build is his size is about the same. His build is different, but his size is the same. And I think part of it too is that he's a little bit stronger lower body. How does that play into it? If a guy hits him, I don't know that you're going to have Micah bouncing off him, but you know what I mean? Like, there's a little bit more that maybe he can resist because of it. But I am curious to see is that a spark that he can provide with that? And not so much about winning or losing this game, but just kind of give some energy to the offense, just like Taylor.
Right. I mean, he's not like thick, like with 5 C's like Russell Wilson or anything like that, but he certainly,
he's strong. He's got a strong lower body. That's because he's like 220 and it's kind of solid. You know what I mean?
And there's just, but to your point about his swagger, I think the thing that I noticed, just the demeanor, especially in the last 2 weeks, obviously, we know what Taylor is. And I think we all love talking to that guy just because he's very insightful and he's real and he's down to earth. I think the difference that I saw with Sam, and maybe it's, maybe he's just a little different because he's not a 7-year vet like Carson, but today it was, hey, what are your expectations or what do you want from Sunday? And he just said, win. And that to me, just the short, quick, I know exactly what I want to do. Yes, I want to prove things to myself. Yes, I want to get better and go out there and show my teammates I can do this and I can be the guy. But the number one goal is win. And that sounds so basic, but at the same time, it was pretty refreshing.
Do you think we've seen, the last of Carson, I think, is a given, right? So what about Taylor?
That is a fascinating question because to me, that question is, what do you pay Taylor Heineke? And if you look at some of the backup quarterback contracts that were given out the last couple of years, that might be more than you're willing to pay. He obviously is a very high end number 2. He's extremely familiar with Scott Turner's scheme. I think that he has proven his value beyond question here. And it is not necessarily his fault that just after a certain amount of time, defenses figure him out or his body breaks down. Those things are given. But if you have a situation which so many teams around the league have had, when your starting quarterback goes down, I saw a stat today, Field Yates, your colleague, tweeted out 65 different starting quarterbacks this year, wow, which is, I believe, the most in the NFL since like 1970 or something, since the merger. Quarterback injuries, for whatever reason, I think are up or teams are moving on from them. And having a valuable stopgap is invaluable. So I think, for them to retain Heineke is probably important, but I do question what the price point would be.
I agree. And I think the other thing is, will he want to come back after these last couple of weeks and just, does he feel like they're trying to scapegoat him or not? And that I think that will all play into his decision, whether or not he wants to come back versus I think if I'm them, I want him back for that reason. They're 12, 11-1 with him the last 2 years, 2-7 with everybody else starting. So it's not just because or in spite of him, but it shows that with him as he's a good backup. You come in, you can hold the fort down, you can win. And yeah, you need other stuff around you, but he did do that. And this year, 5-3-1, and then just kind of the offense kind of ran out of steam. And then it's not on him, it's on Carson Wentz and the staff and Wentz not getting it done. So I don't blame him, but I'll be curious to see if he would want to come back too.
Yeah. And it's tough, right? Because I feel like his identity is so enmeshed in the city. It's where he came back. It's where he's had this great story, and he's accomplished a lot. He was out of the league, and I know everybody talks about him being on his sister's couch, but I think that this guy, if he decides to leave, has certainly earned the agency to say, hey, I'm going to go hold the clipboard or hold down the fort for somebody else and try to get, the Chad Henne career. And I think that, you have to respect that. I think if you're a Commanders fan, though, obviously like Commanders fans will, it seems like always have love for him, because even after that first series on Sunday, they were calling for him after Carson Wentz threw that pick.
I think you have to, it's easy to root for a guy who maxes out. You don't feel like he's got all this talent and he's wasting it. You feel like he's squeezing everything out of it and that people respond to it. We get that. So I think that's always been a good thing with Howell. He's a 5th round pick. And I know they always talk about, hey, he may have been a 1st round pick if he had come out the previous year, et cetera, et cetera. Well, he didn't, so he wasn't. So do you view him as, how did you view him coming out of the draft? I know they liked him before the draft, but they still was 5th round pick. So how do you view him? Do you view him as that, or do you view him as someone like, hey, maybe he's better than that because of what we saw the previous year?
Well, I think this is a tough question, because I feel like he does have undeniable physical talents that you want to see developed, that you want to see what he's capable of. But at the same time, even if he were a 1st round pick, I do sort of take that caveat, because when I was at the Senior Bowl in Mobile, Alabama last year, everybody was talking about this is a weak quarterback draft class. Even the top guy, Malik Willis, is still rawer than Josh Allen was when he was coming out of Wyoming. So even if he had been a 1st round pick, I still would have questioned the validity to that, because you look around, Desmond Ridder, Kenny Pickett, some of these other 1st round picks that are playing. Kenny Pickett, to me, hasn't shown that he is going to be a franchise guy, and he was the first one taken of him. So a 5th round pick, a 1st round pick. I mean, I know draft status matters, and certainly it matters in your contract value and what sort of opportunities you get later on in your career. That's been proven out time and time again. But I don't have this guy is going to be the future of the franchise expectations right away.
Right. And I don't think you should, because for that reason, I think what we've heard all year is that, yes, they've liked his progress, pleased with his progress, intrigued by him, but nobody's sitting there saying, just wait for the future. Like, I think there's intrigue.
Yeah. And so like the question to me is, because you don't want to get swayed by result, right? Like if your process is, how much are we going to read into these 4 quarters? Because Ron Rivera left open the idea, to me, he was suggesting today that Sam could be the guy they bet on going into next season. He could be the quarterback that they say, hey, we actually don't have to address this position. 2023 week 1 starter, it's Sam Howell. And that's really tough for me, because these 4 quarters are going to be instrumental. How much are you going to read into them? I could totally see, an argument for both sides. I don't mean to disparage either one, but if you're going to make that gamble, you have to be very confident that he can keep developing.
And my thing would be, if he goes out and plays great, I think that's great. I'm still going to look for more competition. It doesn't mean you have to mortgage everything. It's like, you know what? This kid showed us something. You don't have to mortgage the future to go get certainly Derek Carr or someone like that. So I think it at least gives you something to build on while you're still also looking for more competition for him. I think the other thing that'll be interesting with him is just, what if he goes out and has a great game? What are people going to say then? He's like, wait a minute. Now, and I will say the Howellians are going to be they're going to be Howelling all night, but it's not really set up for him to have that because of who might be missing. But what if he goes out and does that?
I mean, that's a great question. I think then you're probably less incentivized to go out and get competition like a Derek Carr because you already gave up, a fair amount of draft capital for Wentz. And I don't think I could be wrong. And obviously it's January 4th when we're recording this, but I can't see them falling in love with a quarterback prospect in the draft again. And they probably won't be in position to get the Bryce Young, the CJ Stroud. And even if they wanted to, they would take a haul to move up. So I'm going into this offseason thinking like Sam Howell is not a perfect prospect, not a perfect answer, but he might be the best answer that you have unless you're also willing to say, okay, like a second and a third or whatever the trade compensation ends up being to take on Derek Carr.
Well, I think the other thing is you bring up the rookie class, and this is going to be an interesting game because you can get a better draft pick, if Dallas wins. And I think at this point, that's what I would want. But you can also then compare it, like depending on how he plays, do you need to go get a guy in the first round if he's sitting there? Or does Howell give you the ability to go get a veteran to come in knowing that you have something more to build off of? But the other thing I'm wondering about there too, if he does go out and play, then they're going to be people saying, see, I told you they should have put him in 3 weeks ago and blah, 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 blah. And I would say, hey, maybe you're right, but I don't know that we're going to see that. But you know what I'm saying? Like, how people are going to get, and it's like, if Rivera had listened to me, so.
Are you prepared to eat crow on the pod?
No.
I was going to say,
called
the John
listen,
Keim Report.
It's called that. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to lie and say, I told you that I've been backing you guys up. I would say like, hey, but I also think guys play at the right time sometimes in that development. Now, a few weeks ago, he's probably about the same as he is now. You know what I mean? So maybe, but you see all these other guys coming in, Brock Purdy's of the world, I think have been benefited from having Kyle Shanahan.
I was going to say that's the number one thing.
That's the number one thing. And like watching Kyle is a master class in how to work with the rookie quarterback, give him time, space to throw, et cetera. So last thing, what else are you looking for from this game? Any other players that you're saying curious to see him?
I mean, it's hard not to say Chris Paul, the offensive guard, because Ron Rivera, I think at least probably every week for the last 6 or 7 weeks has unprompted hyped him up, even though they've made him inactive every game. He's been like, but Chris Paul, he's going to be a player. And every time I think like, if he's going to be a player, why not make him active? Why not make him the swing guard? But at the same time, we're going to see him. And so I'm very curious to see where his development is at, especially because that position has been such a problem for them this year, particularly getting both of, Trey Turner and Andrew Norwell in space, which I think even when you I know you were not trying to do the same thing when Brian Robinson came back, but you really lost a lot of the outside zone, some of the attacking the edges stuff because you couldn't get your guards out there. So I think Chris Paul, not to put all of that on him, of course, but I'm very curious to see if he's could be an answer there or if they're going to have to go address that position.
And I think that's the thing I'm curious about is
just real quick, even if he is good, they still have to address that position.
1,000%. Nobody ever said, but you still need more, but at least he gives you another answer and a potential answer inside. I think it's asking a lot again for a guy who's inactive every week to go out there and just like, oh my God, look what he did. Look at how he just pancaked, Lawrence here, whatever. And that's asking a lot. Right. And so we'll see, but if he shows you something that you can build on, then maybe it's another thing we could say, there's at least depth there, get more competition, but at least this guy shown he could do this. So we'll see. I think that's what we're looking at.
At the risk of having everyone tune out of this pod, I know it's January 4th, 2023, but what are the odds we'll see Chris Paul and Sam Cosmi as the starting guards next year?
Well, I think there's a good chance one of those guys will be there and it'll be Cosmi.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, we'll see. I mean, that's a good question. Well, that's a week 3 in the offseason kind of question that we'll get to.
Visit this in training camp.
Revisit that. Anyway, that's Sam Fortier. By the way, I'm wishing my son Matthew a happy birthday. He'll be editing this one, editing this video. So happy birthday. Great kid, does a great job. And this guy does a great job too. Sam, tell people where they can find him.
Happy birthday, Matthew, real quick. At Sam Fortier, the SAM, the number 4 TR. I think I almost forgot that. But thank you very much.
All right. Thanks for tuning in. And I will be back on Friday night / Saturday morning with keys and prediction for the finale, which sounds ridiculous to do, but I'm going to do some different kind of keys and predictions because honestly, whatever, right? Anyway, That's it from me, and I'll talk to you next time.